Nobody told me it would look like a ghost procession. That's the only way I can describe it. I've been to London 3 times. I know what the city looks like at noon when the tourists are stacked 6 deep along the mall, and everyone has their phones up, and the whole thing feels like a theme park wearing a crown. I know that version of London. That London is loud and warm and slightly smells of chips. This was not that London. This was 4:17 in the morning, and I was standing on Constitution Hill with cold fingers and a flask of tea that had stopped being warm somewhere around Sloane Square on the Tube, and the streets were, I want to say empty, but that's not right. Empty is nothing. This was held. The streets felt held, like a breath the city was keeping in, like the whole of Westminster had been quietly asked to wait. I hadn't planned on being there. That's the honest version. The plan, if you could call it that, started with insomnia and a wrong turn on the internet at 2 in the morning, 3 weeks before the coronation. I'd been reading something about the logistics of crowd control, which is the kind of thing I read at 2 in the morning because I am exactly as dull as that sounds, and I fell into a thread on a military history forum. Someone username something like Drum Major 1953, the kind of username that tells you everything, had written a long post about pre-coronation rehearsals, how they happen, when they happen. Before the public wakes up, he'd written, before London remembers it's London. I don't know why that phrase lodged itself in me like a splinter, before London remembers it's London. I sat with it for a while. Then I looked up what time sunrise was in May. Then I set an alarm. My partner thought I'd lost my mind. She didn't say it unkindly. She said it the way you say something to a person you love who has been doing slightly unhinged things since a difficult year, gently, with one eyebrow doing most of the emotional labor. You're going to stand outside in the dark, she said, to watch people rehearse walking. It's more than walking. Oliver, she looked at me over her reading glasses. It's walking in very nice hats. She wasn't wrong. I went anyway. I want to tell you what London looks like at 4 in the morning because most people never see it, and it's one of those things that makes you feel like you found a room in a house you've lived in for years. A room that was always there, door always unlocked, and you just never tried it. The first thing is the quiet. Not silence. London is never silent. There's always a siren somewhere in the distance, always a fox crying like something that's lost its whole world, always the low diesel murmur of a night bus doing its rounds through streets that barely acknowledge it. But the surface noise is gone, the human noise. The 10,000 conversations and the footsteps and the wheeled suitcases over cobblestones and the laughing outside pubs, all of it gone. And what's left underneath is older and stranger and hard to name. The second thing is the light, or the non-light. The sky over the Thames at that hour is a specific color that I have never been able to successfully describe to anyone. It's not black. It's not navy. It's the color that exists between those two with a thinness to it, like the darkness is already beginning to apologize for itself, already preparing to leave. The street lamps throw circles of amber that don't quite reach each other. So you walk through pools of orange and then through gaps of that thin dark, orange and dark, orange and dark, all the way down the mall. The trees along the mall are enormous. I'd never noticed. In the daytime, they're background. At 4 in the morning, they're the whole scene, these massive plane trees with their peeling bark and their huge canopy arms reaching over the road. And the wind was doing something through them. A low, long sound, not quite a moan, more like a held note, like someone pressing a key on an organ and just leaving it there. I stood at the Victoria Memorial Roundabout, the big golden Victoria up on her plinth, her back to the palace gates, and I looked down the length of the mall toward Trafalgar Square, and I thought, this is what it looked like the night before everything. Any everything. Pick your moment. The night before an armistice, the night before a funeral, the night before a king. I'd been standing there maybe 20 minutes, hands around my flask, starting to feel genuinely stupid when I heard it. not saw, heard. A sound that had no business being on an empty street at 4 in the morning. Hooves. Not fast, not urgent. A walking rhythm, measured and deliberate, the kind of sound that has been trained into the bone over years until it becomes a metronome the horse carries in its own chest. And under it, underneath the hooves, boots, dozens of boots, moving in a unison so complete it sounded almost mechanical, almost like a recording, like someone had pressed play on a memory of soldiers marching. I turned. They came out of the darkness of Birdcage Walk, like they'd materialized from the pavement itself. I need to try to describe this correctly, because I think I'll fail if I'm not careful. There were maybe 60 of them. Maybe more. It was dark and they were moving, and I was trying to count and also trying to breathe, which turned out to be difficult to do simultaneously. The household cavalry in front, the horses picking up that amber lamplight on their flanks, tack jingling in a way that was somehow both chaotic and perfectly regular. The riders sitting with that particular stillness that isn't actually stillness at all, but is instead a constant invisible negotiation between a human and 1,000 pounds of nervous animal. A negotiation so practiced it looks like nothing. Behind them the foot guards, bearskins on, at 4 in the morning on an empty road in the dark. Bearskins. Here's the thing about the bearskins that nobody tells you. At night, with no daylight, they don't look ceremonial. They look ancient. They look like something pre-electric, pre-gunpowder even, like you've been pulled through the floor of the present into some earlier version of the island where the ceremony is not theater but technology, where this exact arrangement of men and cloth and rhythm is what keeps something important from coming apart. Nobody was watching. That's what I couldn't get past. There were no cameras set up. No barriers, no tourists, no photographers, no dignitaries. There was me, and there was a French couple I'd spotted 20 meters down who'd clearly had a similar idea and were clutching each other with a mixture of cold and amazement. And there was a man in a high-vis vest doing something to a road sign who had stopped doing it and was just standing with his screwdriver held loose at his side, watching. That was the audience. And they marched like the audience was 50,000. The first time the column stopped, I thought something had gone wrong. They were about 200 meters from the memorial when the whole formation halted, hooves and boots going silent in a single beat. One collective held breath, and a figure on horseback near the front turned, and there was a brief exchange with someone on foot. Low voices, too far to hear. Then a pause. The pause went on long enough that the French couple exchanged a look. Then a command, single word sharp, carrying clean through the quiet air. And they started again. But differently, a different pace, half a step slower. The hooves now coming down with slightly more time between each strike, the boots behind finding the new rhythm immediately, adjusting without disruption, and I understood then what I was watching. I was watching them try something. Watching them calibrate. This was not a performance, or it was a performance in the way that surgery is a performance, a highly technical sequence of precise actions that must be executed without error in front of an unforgiving audience. And right now they were in the rehearsal room with the lights off, finding out what the body does wrong before the day when it cannot. They made 3 complete passes of the memorial before I lost feeling in my feet. On the second pass, something happened that I've thought about a lot since. A horse third from the left in the cavalry line, a gray that was catching more lamplight than the others, shied. Not dramatically, not a movie horse rear and whinny, just a small sideways flinch, a skitter of hooves on tarmac, the animal's head going left when everything else was going straight. The rider absorbed it without any visible adjustment. A minute correction, somewhere in the lower back and legs, invisible to me and probably to anyone except another rider. The horse found the line again. They kept moving. The whole thing took maybe 4 seconds. But here's what I noticed. Nobody around the rider reacted. Not the rider ahead, not the rider behind, not the foot guards. Not a single head turned. Not a single step faltered. They had all in their peripheral vision, in whatever part of a trained brain processes the difference between a recoverable error and a crisis, assessed it in a fraction of a second and classified it as recoverable. And they had done so without communication, without eye contact, without breaking anything. That's a different kind of trust than most of us ever practice. The wordless operational kind. The kind that takes years to build and lives in the muscles, not the mind. I stood there with my cold tea, and I felt, absurdly, like I was going to cry. Not sadness, not moved by pageantry emotion, something harder to name. Something about watching a group of humans be very quietly extraordinary in a place where no one required them to be, at an hour when they could have been less precise and no one would have known. Something about the absolute absence of performance in something that is, technically, pure performance. The discipline wasn't for me. It wasn't for anyone. It just was. By 5 in the morning, the sky had shifted to that particular gray-pink that London does before sunrise, the kind of light that makes everything look like a very old photograph of itself. The formation had completed what seemed like its final circuit. I watched them reassemble, not dissolve, reassemble with the same precision they'd held for the last 40 minutes, the column reforming with the cavalry remounting to the front, and begin to move back up Birdcage Walk toward Wellington Barracks, retreating back into the pre-morning dark. The sound of them faded. Hooves first, then boots, then nothing. The French couple had gone. The man in the high-vis had gone back to his road sign. The mall was empty again, and the trees were doing their organ note thing, and Victoria had her back to all of it, as she always does, looking out toward Trafalgar, looking out at the long straight road that in 3 weeks would be lined with people 8 deep from here to there. Every face turned the same direction, watching the thing these soldiers were right now quietly, thanklessly, perfectly learning. I stood there for a while after they'd gone. The city was starting to wake around me, a delivery van somewhere, a far-off siren, a pigeon doing its ridiculous thing on the memorial railing. I thought about the rider on the gray horse, about those 4 seconds of invisible correction, about how nobody turned, about how the most extraordinary thing I'd seen in years happened in the dark, in the cold, in front of nobody, and would never be filmed or reported or remembered by anyone but me and a French couple whose names I didn't know. 3 weeks later, I stood on the mall with 200,000 people, and I watched the procession come down that same stretch of road, and it was magnificent, genuinely magnificent, the kind of thing that rearranges something in your chest. But I kept looking at the gray horse. He was perfect, not a single sideways step. And nobody knew why. Sergeant Warren Hibbs will tell you, he doesn't remember the first rehearsal he ever led. He says this with the particular deadpan of a man who has been asked a lot of questions he finds faintly absurd. He sits across a table in the taffy at Wellington Barracks with a mug of tea that is plainly not his first of the morning. It's 6:43, and he's already been up for 4 hours. And he says it the way someone might say they don't remember the first time they rode a bike. Not because it wasn't significant, because there have been so many since. It becomes part of the body, he says. Eventually you stop counting. He's 41. He joined at 17, which means he has been doing this for nearly half his life, and you can see it in the way he holds himself, not stiff. Nothing like the parade ground rigidity civilians imagine when they picture military posture. It's more like he's been plumbed vertical, like the line between his ears and his heels is structural rather than trained. He could probably do it in his sleep. Some mornings, he says, he practically does. I need to give you the geography first, because it matters more than you'd think. Wellington Barracks sits on Birdcage Walk, which runs along the southern edge of St. James's Park, which is directly adjacent to Buckingham Palace. It's a short walk. For a regiment that exists to serve the palace, it's a deliberately short walk, close enough that a mounted patrol could reach the palace gates in under 2 minutes if required, which is not a hypothetical. The proximity is functional. It always has been. The barracks itself is a long, serious-looking building, red brick and white trim, the kind of architecture that communicates permanence without bothering to explain itself. The parade ground inside the gates is smaller than most visitors imagine. It's surrounded on 3 sides by accommodation blocks and the regimental offices, and on the 4th by the entrance arch through which you can see, if the gate is open, the park and the pale morning sky above the trees. On the morning I was granted access, a single morning, a single observation, and I want to be clear that I was under no illusions about how unusual this was. The parade ground had the specific quality of a place that has been inhabited for a very long time by people doing the same things. The cobblestones were worn in patterns. There was a smoothness to certain sections of the ground that spoke of 10,000 bootfalls, 100,000, the stone slowly shaped by repetition into a record of itself. Hibbs was waiting for me at the gate at 6:30. He shook my hand once firmly, and then immediately turned and started walking, which I took as an instruction to follow. The section of the rehearsal I was observing was what Hibbs called a spacing calibration. The terminology is dry. What it means is less dry. In a coronation procession, every element of the column, cavalry, foot guards, state carriages, bands, support units, must maintain precise distances from each other across a route of approximately 2 miles, through varying road widths, around corners, over the slight gradient of the mall. The spacing must look uniform to someone watching from the pavement, and it must look uniform from above, and it must look uniform at the beginning of the route and at the end, despite the fact that horses naturally accelerate slightly on open stretches and slow slightly around bends, despite the fact that a column of 60 humans moving together will develop small compressions and expansions like a slow wave moving through water. The calibration process involves walking the route in the dark, stopping at predetermined marks, chalk lines scratched onto road surfaces, small cones placed against curbs, and measuring, not with instruments, with eyes and muscle memory and a vocabulary of commands that have barely changed in 200 years. The marks on the road, I said. How far in advance do you put them out? Night before, Hibbs said. Sometimes 2 nights before if the weather forecast is bad. Rain washes chalk. Does it affect the horses if they see the chalk lines? Do they react? He looked at me for a moment. The look was not unkind. It was the look of a man translating something from a language only he speaks. The horses, he said carefully, are not looking at the road. The first time I understood what precision under no pressure actually costs, it was watching a young guardsman named, and I was given this name. He asked to be included Thomas. Lance Corporal Thomas Blaszczyk, 23, Polish-British, from somewhere outside Derby, who had been in the regiment for 2 years and was participating in his first pre-coronation rehearsal cycle. He was in the 3rd rank of a foot guard formation, not a visible position, not the front, not the back, not a position that would appear in any photograph of the actual event. The middle of the middle, if you're being honest, the kind of position where a certain type of person might coast. He was not coasting. I watched him for 15 minutes. I watched him hit his spacing mark, a small piece of chalk on the road surface that I had to crouch to see with the same foot, at the same interval on every pass. Not approximately, not close. The same foot, the same interval, the same micro-adjustment of stride on the 3rd to last step before the mark that brought him in correctly every time. And I timed it on 4 consecutive passes with my phone stopwatch, and the variance was under half a second. Nobody was filming him. Nobody was watching him specifically. Hibbs was at the front of the column dealing with a timing issue with the band liaison. For all practical purposes, Thomas was anonymous. He did it perfectly anyway. I asked him about it afterward, when the formation had stood easy, and the guardsmen were pulling water bottles from their kit. Does it matter to you, I said, doing it right when no one can tell whether you did? He thought about this seriously. He's the kind of 23-year-old who thinks about things seriously, which is either the regiment's doing or what it's selected for. I couldn't tell which. It matters more, he said finally, when no one's watching. He paused. When someone's watching, you can do it for them. When no one's watching, you only have the thing itself. I wrote that in my notebook 3 times because I was worried I'd misremember it. There is a specific problem with rehearsing ceremonial events in the dark that Hibbs agreed to describe to me in detail, which I found remarkable in its specificity, and in how completely it dismantled my assumptions. The problem is sound. In daylight on the day of an event, the sound environment for any person in that procession is almost completely different from anything they encounter in rehearsal. There are 200,000 people on the route. There are bands. There are aircraft. There are television helicopters. There is the ambient wash of crowd noise, not cheering necessarily, but the living hum of that many human bodies in proximity, a frequency that sits in the lower chest and subtly alters everything. In rehearsal, there is none of this, which means that every command, every cue, every piece of audio information that the participants rely on to maintain their timing is delivered in a completely different acoustic environment than the one in which it will be needed. The horses specifically rely heavily on sound, the hoofbeats of horses adjacent to them, which create a rhythm they naturally synchronize to. In a crowd environment, this becomes unreliable. The crowd reflects sound. The hoofbeats blur. The horse has to be trained not to use sound as its primary synchronization mechanism, which takes months and which is, Hibbs said, one reason the horses are walked in traffic, walked in city environments, walked next to brass bands in public parks, for months before any ceremonial duty. They are not training the horses to be brave. They are training the horses to not need the information they usually rely on. Same for the men, Hibbs said. You take away every prop until the only thing left is the training. He said it the way you'd say something obvious. I sat with it for most of the rest of the morning. At 7:40, the column reassembled for the full route run. This was not what I'd expected. I'd imagined, because I know nothing really about how any of this works, that a full route run would mean a full circuit of the actual 2-mile procession route. It does not. At 4 in the morning there are limits, even on suspended traffic and police liaison. The full route run in pre-dawn rehearsal means the complete sequence of actions, every formation change, every column halt, every band cue, every spacing adjustment compressed into a 1-kilometer stretch of the mall, walked at procession pace with all the correct intervals. It is, in other words, not smaller. It is the full thing folded. I watched from the memorial side, where I could see the length of the formation as it moved. The first thing that struck me still, was the sound, the unity of it. 60 pairs of boots and 8 sets of hooves, and the band somewhere behind me doing a fragment of something slow and enormous that I half recognized and couldn't name, and the whole thing was happening in near darkness on an empty road, and it sounded like a building breathing. The second thing was a moment about halfway through that I've struggled to categorize ever since. The formation reached a particular point on the road, one of the chalk marks, and there was a command, and the cavalry halted. The foot guards behind them did not. There was a gap, 3 seconds, 4, during which the cavalry was stationary and the guards were still moving, and in that gap you could see the whole logic of the procession. You could see how all the separate parts of it were actually separate chains of command, separate timing, separate rhythms, and were only aligned by a structure so rehearsed it had become invisible, like seeing the individual threads in fabric. Then the cavalry moved again, and the fabric closed. I spoke to the bandmaster, Warrant Officer Class 2, name I was asked not to use, after the rehearsal wound down around 9. He was a tall, angular man from West Yorkshire, who had been in military bands for 22 years, and who spoke about the relationship between band tempo and foot guard pace, with the focused intensity of someone describing an engineering problem. "People think we set the pace," he said. "We don't. We match it. We find where the boots are and we go there." This distinction mattered enormously to him. I tried to understand why. "If we set the pace," he said, "and the pace shifts, a horse stumbles, a corner takes longer than planned, we're wrong. And if the band's wrong, everything tries to follow the band and then the whole thing unravels from the music outward." He paused. "But if we match, then we're just a mirror. We can move. We can absorb. The music follows the event and the event stays true." I thought about that for a long time on the tube home. How much of what we think is leadership is actually responsive listening? How much of what we call precision is actually a very sophisticated form of paying attention? I want to tell you the thing that stayed with me longest, and it's small. At the end of the rehearsal, when everything was done and the column had broken, and the guardsmen were standing easy, and the cavalry were being walked in slow circles to cool down, I was standing near the memorial with my notebook, and one of the horses, a bay, stocky, older than the gray from my first pre-dawn observation, walked close enough that I could have touched its flank. The rider was looking at something further up the mall. The horse was just there, present, its enormous eyes calm, its breath coming in slow, even clouds in the cold morning air. It had no idea what any of it was for. It knew the sound of boots behind it. It knew the feel of the rider's seat. It knew the pace and the halt and the spacing and the particular vibration of a brass band close by that meant hold steady and not scatter. It knew all of this the way I know how to breathe. And in 3 weeks it would carry all of that knowledge down this same road in front of 200,000 people, and it would be perfect. Not because it had been told what the occasion meant, not because it understood the weight of history pressing down through that long, pale road, but because it had been here before. In the dark, in the cold, when no one was watching. After I left the barracks, I walked back through St. James's Park instead of taking the tube. The park was busy now, morning joggers, office workers cutting through, dogs, pigeons dismantling a discarded sandwich with focused contempt. I stopped at the lake and watched the pelicans for a while. They've been in that park since 1664, the pelicans, given by a Russian ambassador, completely unconcerned with the whole business. I thought about Thomas hitting his chalk mark with the same foot on every pass. The only thing left is the thing itself. I walked back to the station with that in my chest like a coal. The morning of the actual coronation, I woke at 3. Not by alarm, by some older mechanism. The body has its own sense of occasion. I lay in the dark in the Travelodge off Victoria Street and listened to the city. It was already different. I could hear it. Not noise exactly, not yet, but a quality of wakefulness that hadn't been there at the same hour 3 weeks before, when I'd stood at the memorial with my cold flask and watched the ghost procession. This was the city with its eyes open, aware, holding something. I dressed without turning the big light on. I don't know why, it seemed right. By 4:15, I was on the mall. I had not slept well. My feet still remembered the cold from 3 weeks ago and appeared to resent having been brought back. I had 1 cup of coffee from a van near the station that was already running, already doing good business at 4 in the morning. The man behind the counter moving with the particular efficient kindness of someone who understood that the people in front of him were all here for the same enormous, fragile thing. He didn't charge me. "On a day like this," he said, waving it away. I stood there for a moment. Then I said thank you and walked toward the palace. The crowds were already building. Not thick, not yet, but they were there. Camping chairs, flags. Families with blankets and thermoses and children who had been allowed to stay up all night and were now running on adrenaline and the specific mania of the under 10. There were older people. I saw a woman who must have been in her 80s, sitting in a folding chair with what appeared to be a full hamper, a Union flag on a short wooden stick, and the absolute unruffled composure of someone who had been to one of these before and knew exactly what you needed. There were groups of tourists from places that have no monarchy taking photographs of themselves against the empty road with the palace behind them. There were people in period dress. A man in full Victorian military uniform was having a conversation on his mobile phone, which I want to say was jarring, but was somehow perfect. There was a group of about 12 people who had clearly all come together, wearing matching t-shirts with a photograph on the front that I didn't look at closely enough to identify. The noise was low and excited and had a warmth to it, despite the temperature. People talked to strangers. People shared food. A small boy of about 6 approached me and showed me his flag, and I told him it was an excellent flag, and he agreed with great seriousness, and then ran back to his father. This was all happening in the dark, in the cold, before 5 in the morning. London was awake. I found a spot near the memorial, the same spot, more or less, where I'd stood on the night of the rehearsal, and I waited. I had 4 hours until the procession. I had a book I didn't open. I had a thermos that actually held heat this time. I had the particular sensation of standing somewhere for a reason and knowing what the reason was, which sounds obvious but is actually rarer than you'd think. The feeling of having been pointed at something and choosing to walk toward it. A woman beside me, mid-50s, from Edinburgh, visiting with her daughter who was in her 20s and appeared to be half asleep on her feet, asked me how long I'd been there. Just arrived, I said, but I was here a few weeks ago, early, when they were rehearsing. The mother looked at me with immediate interest. Her daughter opened one eye. You saw the rehearsal. Some of it a bit by accident. What was it like? I tried to think of how to answer that. It looked like something happening for its own sake, I said finally, like it didn't need anyone watching. The daughter opened the other eye. That's actually quite profound for 4 in the morning, she said. Her mother looked mortified. I laughed. Here is what I want to try to explain, and I'm going to attempt it once and accept that I might not get it right. We talk about ceremony and tradition in a certain way. We say it's pageantry. We say it's performance. We say the horses are for the cameras, the bearskins are for the tourists, the precision is theater. And there is truth in that. I am not naive. I understand that these institutions are entangled with power and history in ways that are genuinely complicated, and that the spectacle serves a function beyond the purely aesthetic. But I keep coming back to the rehearsal. The rehearsal happened whether there was an audience or not. The discipline was maintained whether anyone was measuring it or not. Thomas hit his chalk mark with the same foot, at the same interval, on every pass in the dark, in front of no one. The rider on the gray horse absorbed a 4-second crisis without a word to anyone, and the horse was perfect on the day. The bandmaster found where the boots were and went there, in the dark, on an empty road, at 4:30 in the morning, with no cameras and no crowd and no ceremony to justify it. What is that? I keep turning it over, and I keep arriving at the same place. It's a way of treating the thing itself, the action, the movement, the precision, as if it has inherent worth regardless of who witnesses it, as if the quality of the thing is not contingent on the audience, as if being seen is completely separate from being true. I don't know many areas of life where that still operates, where people do the full version of something even when a reduced version would satisfy the requirement, where the standard is held not because someone is watching, but because the standard is the standard. I found it in an empty street at 4 in the morning. In a rehearsal, nobody filmed. At 6 o'clock, the sky started doing what it does. I've described London pre-dawn before, and I don't want to repeat myself, so I'll say only this. The particular moment when a London sky decides to become morning is not gradual. It pretends to be gradual and then it isn't. It's a series of thresholds, each one invisible until you're past it. And then suddenly the trees on the mall are green again, not black. The palace facade is warm stone again, not gray. The faces of the people around you are faces. The city remembers it's a city. The woman from Edinburgh pointed at a window in the palace facade that had a light in it. High up, we stood looking at it. Neither of us said anything. At 8:30, the route was sealed. Police moved down the mall in a line, gently, with the professional patience of people who have done this before and would have preferred not to do it at this particular stretch, because the crowd did not want to move and express this preference politely, but with genuine conviction. Ripple effects through the crowd as people shifted. My view went briefly from excellent to blocked by a tall man in a waterproof jacket, and then a gap appeared to my left, and I moved into it, and the tall man's jacket, and I reached a kind of détente. The woman from Edinburgh had disappeared into the crowd. Her daughter had apparently woken up fully and was using her height to scout sightlines. I had the particular enclosed feeling of being deep in a large crowd, the body heat, the small sounds of hundreds of conversations, the way your personal space slowly renegotiates itself until you are standing closer to strangers than you ever would in ordinary life, and this is fine. This is the social contract of the shared occasion. Then the band. Somewhere up toward Buckingham Palace, a long, sweeping phrase of brass that came over the crowd noise like weather. Nobody needed to announce what it meant. Every head turned. When the procession came, it came first as sound. The same sound. The sound I'd heard in the dark 3 weeks before, coming out of Birdcage Walk like something materializing from the pavement. Hooves and boots in that uncanny unison, and under it the band, and under that a sound I hadn't heard in rehearsal. The crowd. The wave of it. Moving down the route ahead of the procession itself. The roar of it building and building as the column came closer, rolling through the crowd like the sound was the thing itself arriving. I looked for the gray horse. I don't know why I was so convinced I'd recognize it. Horses look different in daylight, in that configuration, at that distance, under those conditions. But I was looking anyway. The cavalry came past in the slow, measured walk I knew, and I knew it. That was the thing. My body knew the rhythm of it from having stood in an empty street at 4 in the morning and heard it in the cold. And there was something almost vertiginous about hearing it now wrapped in this noise, this light, this occasion. Like a piece of music you know intimately being played in an enormous hall for the first time. The same. Different. Both. Third from the left. Gray. Moving in a perfect line, head steady, pace precise. The rider sitting with that plumbed stillness, the tack catching the morning light. Not a single sideways step. The procession took 20 minutes to pass. I stood with my thermos pressed against my chest and I watched all of it. The carriages, the bands, the household cavalry riding out and back, the foot guards moving with that unity that had seemed slightly uncanny in the dark and in daylight was simply beautiful, genuinely, structurally beautiful. The way that anything that is difficult and done well becomes beautiful. The way that a complicated piece of music, perfectly played, reorganizes the listener. People wept. Not dramatically, just the small personal leaking that happens when something touches something old in you. The woman next to me, not the one from Edinburgh, someone else, someone in a hat with a small paper flag, was wiping her eyes and immediately looked embarrassed about it. And I said nothing because there was nothing to say, and also because if I'd spoken, I might have done the same thing and I wasn't ready for that. Afterward, when the route opened again, and the crowd moved like a slow tide back toward the parks and the tube stations and the pubs that were definitely already open, I stood at the memorial for a while. The chalk marks were gone, of course. They'd have been cleaned off days ago. The cones were gone. The road was just a road again, full of people walking, full of the aftermath of occasion, dropped programs, a lost hat, a child's flag that had been separated from its owner and was sitting alone against the curb. I thought about the night of the rehearsal, the sound of them coming out of the dark, the way Hibbs had walked ahead of me into the barracks without breaking stride, the assumption that I'd follow built so completely into his bearing that it hadn't occurred to him to check. I thought about the bandmaster, We find where the boots are and we go there. I thought about the gray horse, perfect because he'd been here before in the cold and the dark when it didn't count. I thought about Thomas in the middle, hitting a chalk line with the same foot, because the only thing left is the thing itself. I thought about that window high in the palace facade, with the light in it at 6 in the morning, and the woman from Edinburgh looking at it without speaking. Some things are not for talking about. Some things are for standing in front of. On the tube home, I was squeezed between a man in a kilt and a family of Americans who had clearly had the best day of their lives. The parents slightly overwhelmed, and the kids absolutely electric. The youngest sitting on her father's lap, still holding her flag and explaining something to it in a very serious tone, as if the flag might not fully have grasped the significance of what it had just witnessed. I watched her for a while. When the father caught me looking, he smiled the way you smile at a stranger who has seen the same thing you have. The exhausted, full, inexplicable smile of people who have been part of something. I smiled back. The youngest looked up at me and held up her flag. I gave her a solemn nod. She went back to her briefing. I never found out what happened to the French couple from the night of the rehearsal. I thought about them on the way home, how they'd been standing 40 meters down the mall, clutching each other in the cold, watching the same ghost procession I was watching, feeling, I assumed, I hoped, whatever version of that thing I'd felt. I hoped they came back for the day. I hoped they found a good spot. I hoped the gray horse meant something to them too, even without knowing why. Most of what matters about the coronation happened 3 weeks before it, in the dark, in front of nobody. That's the part they don't film. That's the part that makes the rest possible.